Good evening, everyone. I'm Vera Jelinek. I'm the Divisional Dean of the Center for Global Affairs at the School of Professional Studies. Many of you know me by now. I just want to start by telling you that when I was studying international affairs at the School of Advanced International Studies, which is Hopkins, and at their Bologna Center, more than half a century ago, could not have imagined an event and a panel such as the one we have here tonight. Yes, there were prosecutions at Nuremberg, crimes against humanity, which formed the basis of my undergraduate studies in part, but international law and human rights were subjects of theoretical and rarefied contemplation in academic institutions. I think times have changed, and international law and human rights today have relevance, practical and significant applications, impact, and are an integral component of our Masters in Global Affairs, both in the classroom and out in the field. Our Center for Global Affairs is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Believe me, it's hard to believe. I've been at NYU for 30, and 10 of those have been here. Those years have seen the launch and expansion of a master's program, continuing education, and public events. International law and human rights are a component in all three of these tiers. Our students travel to the Eastern Congo, to Kenya, among many others, and document both progress and violations of human rights. Our faculty pursue their own research and supervise the cutting-edge work of their students. Moderator, Jennifer Trahan, is largely responsible for making international law and human rights such a dynamic and meaningful part of all three tiers of what we offer. She leads our international law concentration and human rights concentration and our field intensives to the former Yugoslavia, and imbues our students with her passionate commitment to human rights protection and observance. She has warned me several times to be brief about her achievements, so I will only highlight a few. She teaches international law, human rights in theory and practice, international justice, trans justice, the U.S. use of force, war on terror, and many others. She has, in the past, worked with the International Justice Program of Human Rights Watch, served on the as an Iraq prosecutions consultant to the National Justice, and worked on cases before the Special Court for Sierra Leone and the International Tribunal for Rwanda. She's the author of numerous articles, including on the Iraqi High Tribunal, as well as 2 books on genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. She was an NGO observer at the ICC Review Conference in Kampala, Uganda. She has also taught at Columbia and at Fordham, Brooklyn Law, New School, and elsewhere. Earlier in her career, she spent 10 years in private practice as a litigator at a large New York City law firm. We are absolutely delighted that she stopped that and that she came here and is teaching. She holds an AB from Amherst, a JD from NYU School of Law, and an LLM from Columbia Law School. And most important, she is a very valued member and respected member of our full-time faculty. Please join me in welcoming Jen Trahan, who will introduce tonight's panel.
Thank you. I'm a little embarrassed because that wasn't the short form. My audience, I'm extremely pleased to welcome our distinguished set of panelists. I couldn't think of a stronger set of panelists to discuss these issues. Our panelists are, in order, Ambassador Stephen J. Rapp, Office of Global Criminal Justice, and the 3rd Chief Prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Béatrice Lefrappé-Duhalène, legal advisor to the French mission to the United Nations. David Crane, professor of practice, Syracuse University College of Law, and first chief prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Richard Dicker, director of the International Justice Program of Human Rights Watch, and Mohammed Al-Abdallah, executive director of the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center. Welcome. I'm very pleased to have you here tonight. Horrific crimes have been committed and are being committed in the Syrian civil war, a war with nearly 200,000 fatalities. Government forces are implicated in massacres, widespread attacks on civilians, systematic murder, torture, rape, and forced disappearances, all amounting to crimes against humanity. Government forces are implicated in war crimes of murder, hostage-taking, torture, rape, recruiting and using children in hostilities, and targeting civilians. They have disregarded special protections accorded to hospitals, medical, and humanitarian personnel. Government forces are implicated in indiscriminate and disproportionate aerial bombardment and shelling, including the use of barrel bombs, chlorine gas, and of course the horrific chemical weapons attack. In fact, David Crane has also co-authored the 2014 Syrian detainee report and detailed the systematic torture and killing of more than 11,000 detainees by the Syrian regime in one region alone. Non-state arms, and this would include the so-called Islamic State, ISIS, and the Front and the Islamic Front, are implicated in the war crimes of murder, execution, torture, hostage-taking, enforced disappearances, rape, recruiting and using children in hostilities, and attacking protected objects. They have targeted medical personnel, religious personnel, and as we all know, journalists. Armed groups have besieged and indiscriminately shelled civilian neighborhoods and used car bombs in civilian areas. Members of ISIS in particular have committed torture, murder, enforced disappearances, and forcible displacement. These all amount to crimes against humanity. And I'm taking these from the report of the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic, UN document AHRC 60 from August 2014. Human Rights Watch has concluded in its report, Criminal Justice for Serious Crimes Under International Law, that foreign fighters and groups linked to al-Qaeda have been among the worst perpetrators of these abuses. The Commission of Inquiry concludes that there are hundreds of alleged perpetrators. One can very easily imagine a much higher figure. So how does one begin to ensure justice for these crimes? Given the dire headlines, you might think this is premature. I will suggest that it is not. There are important steps that can be taken in the short run. In the minimum, these would include preserving evidence, especially any government archives that are located. Perhaps most importantly, building shared international commitment that there must be a fair and impartial justice, creating political will. And the corollary that goes with this, that in no event can justice be negotiated away. In the longer term, what is possible will determine on how the outcome is achieved. Who is left in power? Whether there is some form of power sharing, and to what extent those in power are implicated in crimes or are aligned with those implicated in crimes. This may unfortunately limit the possibilities of what is achievable. There are potential routes to accountability, and I say only potential because it may be very difficult to ensure any of these. And here is where I will seek our panelists' views and guidance as to sort these out. Potential options might include UN Security Council referral of the situation to the International Criminal Court. France spearheaded this effort only to be thwarted by the Russian and Chinese use of the veto. Newly potentially on the table would be Iraq ratification of the International Criminal Court statute or execution of an Article 12.3 declaration under the statute. This would create jurisdiction over ISIS crimes in Iraq, but only in Iraq. We might imagine a hybrid tribunal. David Crane has been instrumental in formulating the Chautauqua Blueprint, setting forth a possible form of hybrid tribunal. And the domestic courts within Syria. They will need to be carefully analyzed in terms of capacity and perhaps a vetting mechanism utilized. Universal jurisdiction as well as domestic laws in other countries may play a role, and hopefully these mechanisms would be in conjunction with other transitional justice tools, such as vetting, reparations, and a truth commission. I'm going to turn to our panelists to help us sort out the strengths and weaknesses of these different approaches and make their recommendations. Let me start by asking them, and this would be to any panelist who wants to start us off. In the short run, I suggested what we need to do is preserve evidence of the crimes, build political will, and make sure that justice isn't taken away. Do I have the right short list? Would anyone care to add? How do we build momentum that there must be accountability, and what can be done in the near future?
Sure, if I may start, thank you all for being here, and apologize, I'm giving you my side here, but I want to thank you very much for your remark and pick up a very important and accurate line you just said. It's very difficult to ensure there's accountability and might happen. And I want to, from there, go to Syria, because we have staff inside Syria on the ground serving as documentation hubs in different cities, try to collect information and try to send it out of the country so we can document documentation. The main line I keep hearing all over again, hey, there's no justice will gonna happen. They're gonna sell us off. They're gonna negotiate. He used chemical weapons. Assad used chemical weapons against us. Nobody punished him. It's useless. We got some literally stopping the work because they believe some humanitarian aid support and work is more valuable and more meaningful than keep documenting. And that's the main problem here, because there's no real and clear commitment and direct and public strong commitment from the international community on the accountability case. And that will lead me to a very important point here. We hear lots of statements coming from lots of politicians and different, some UN mission members here. Some of these statements, however, is political, just to basically do the little minimum possible now. What you're doing for the Syrian conflict, well, we're trying to set up a tribunal for Syria, and everybody knows a tribunal now during an active conflict worth nothing. So we need to distinguish between two important things. One, stopping the conflict, which is a very important thing, and between the accountability case. Usually the line is very blurry between both, and it's being mixed sometimes deliberately with some politicians, with some experts, unfortunately. And basically, we need to talk about stopping the conflict in order to be able to start talking about this meaningful discussion about justice. Documentation indeed is very, very important thing, because, and this is my counter argument to my colleagues, staff, and assuming you quit all and we're not documenting, okay, it's not 100% guaranteed we're going to get to tribunal, but assuming we got it after 5 or 10 years with no evidence, would that be better? Or having evidence for maybe potential to have a tribunal? And that's the kind of work we try to encourage people to continue doing. So the first and most important thing is regaining the trust and confidence among the Syrian public. And here there's a couple of problems, because one, of power and violence against people in Syria, against civilians, and nobody really reacted. And the second thing, the confusion, testimonies and statements and comments they get from the international community. So you hear a little bit about ICC, it got vetoed, a little bit about hybrid tribunal, but when people look at the models happened before, where it took 3 or 2 decades, for example, Cambodia recently, we get 88 years, 2 years old perpetrators get verdict in the tribunal. And Syrians doesn't want to hear this. Of course, now it's very, very difficult to map out what's the priorities of Syrians during an active war, because everybody just touched, they suffered a lot, and their demands might be revenge. So The problem I see here in this issue is the lack of public consultations with Syrians. There's lots of great initiatives from lots of great experts, and however, no Syrians involved. So you hear some recommendation about ICC without asking Syrians. You hear recommendation about hybrid tribunal without you hear about domestic tribunals without asking Syrians. We did recently, and we're doing a second round of in-depth interviews. Lots of Syrians, random people selected in different areas of the country. They don't know what's the difference between ICC and hybrid tribunal and domestic tribunal and special chamber in the criminal court in Syria. There's a problem here. There's no outreach, no enough outreach happening to Syrians to tell them. I think there's very little information about how alternatives available for Syrians. For example, if you tell a Syrian now living in a tent in the border between Turkey and Syria for 3 years and tell them, well, special tribunal of Rwanda costed $2.2 billion. We get 6 million IDPs. And guess what? There's very little money available for reconstruction, but we're going to use it for a special tribunal. I don't think anybody will be in favor of a tribunal. A holistic approach of transitional justice, including for the militias, the militant, the disarmament and demobilization. Reparation programs for people, not necessarily to be money, could be apology, could be symbolic reparation programs, and truth commission, setting the truth about what happened in the country. It's as important as a tribunal.
I'll just pause here and just kind of remind the audience that at the end of the day, all of this is for and about the victims. And we tend to forget that for right or wrong reasons. The international community can be very arrogant in how it approaches justice in these terrible atrocity situations. And we have to ask ourselves, and constantly ask ourselves, and remind ourselves, that is the justice we seek, the international community, the justice they want. And if we don't have a correct answer for that, then we may be automatically setting ourselves up for failure. Now, we're not to go into any kind of justice situation in Syria for years. But that doesn't mean we can't listen to the people of Syria, try to be as inclusive as we can in this process. Because Mohammed does bring up some very important points. Stephen and I had the same challenges in West Africa. The people of Sierra Leone had the same questions. Now, one of the things that we tackled, we can't do that in Syria now, developed a town hall program where we went out and asked the people what they thought we should do. And that was a very successful effort, and it allowed the people of Sierra Leone to feel that they were part of the process. Perhaps someday we may have that ability in Syria, perhaps we won't. But I think that's going to be a major part or an important part. Before we just jump in and say, all right, here is your tribunal, whatever, quote, the international community decide, we might want to pause for a while just to go in and because if we don't, then we are in some ways our time, because there was a just process and a just result. May not be the international solution. So I just use this as a word of caution as we talk this evening in dialogue, that there's some certain things we have to be very mindful of, and that is, again, it's for about Syria.
Thank you, Jennifer. Introduction, and indeed, it remains for us very timely to speak about accountability in Syria now, and those were very good points. I will go a little bit further. I think there are a lot of things that we can do now. And I believe we have started, we're just out of a very big ministerial week in the UN. It's the opening of the General Assembly, and they were, I think one of the truly remarkable events of the week was a Danish event at ministerial level about what to do about accountability in Syria. And it's just to point out that it's still very much on everybody's mind. And a lot of good points were made during these exchanges between ministers. Immediate measures, foreign fighters. We can all assume our responsibilities towards foreign fighters. I'm sometimes surprised when even European countries say, why don't we refer foreign fighters to the ICC? Well, why don't we prosecute them themselves. And this is really the spirit of two resolutions that were adopted by the Security Council, 2078, very quickly, very swiftly, leadership of the UK and US. And they encourage states to assume their responsibility and prosecute them. So that's, very something we can all do.
Could I? Yeah.
The closer. Second point. Oh yeah. Okay. Do I start again? Yeah, I could. I'll go directly to the second point. Domestic mechanisms is going to take a long. There is a French saying in my country. There is a French saying, well, to have one of those trees that only get big in 100 years, you'd better plant it now and not wait. And we would really think that we have to start working now. I was discussing it, and with the president of with the representative of the Syrian coalition, the Syrian opposition in New York yesterday, Dr. Gabjan, and he's already thinking, and we're already thinking about modalities. You have the liberated areas. They want governance, they want security, they want services, they want training for police already there. You have what we call the network of free judges and free lawyers. Again, we can also consult them and see what they need. There is a fantastic body, and David Crane knows it. There is a fantastic body of law, of Syrian law, that it's very difficult to know exactly what it is, because over the years, for decades, the successive Assads have just used exceptional jurisdiction, martial law. So there is a review that has been started of this, to see how it can be made international standards, so that we are ready when the times come. And then so Syrian domestic tribunals. We have experience of delocalized domestic tribunals. We did it in some way for Kosovo. So I take the point that maybe we're not ready, but we can start now. Stephen will tell me it's not an exact, that it's hybrid, but we've got a fantastic experience recently, thanks to all the pressures of Stephen Rapp in Central African Republic. Out of nothing, we create a domestic Central African tribunal, and there is a commitment by the government of Central Africa to change its laws, to abolish the death penalty, to create some independence of the judiciary. There is a commitment by us to help with international experts and judges. And yes, today they only have chairs, but they have more. So that's we all start with chairs. So it's important. Then I will come later on the ICC, but I want to tell you that even if a referral of the ICC, or even if a ratification by the future authorities is not maybe for tomorrow, well, actions certainly starts now, and I will list them later. But one you already referred to when you said the political commitment, and we have a new mediator out there. We have Stefan de Mistura. It's very important, of course, that the EU to account in its global strategy the opportunities offered by justice. Not always the case in the mediation up to now, but here we have a good opportunity. And I come back to my list of 10 points of things you guys have to do to get an ICC referral.
I don't know if this is on. I'll look to the back of the room. What's striking to me is the contrast between the gravity and scale of horrific crimes committed against Syrians on the one hand, and on the other hand, any current meaningful mechanism to provide independent, impartial, and fair justice. It's really deeply troubling, and I think reflects the tough terrain justice track is on. And that's for several reasons. But I believe that the steps we take, and we as civil society organizations and governments today, are absolutely crucial in keeping accountability in the picture, even if the results are long-term down the road. And I say that out of a sense of the imperative of keeping faith with victims and others in Syria who have suffered so grievously over the last 3.5 years. I think as international community, if one wants to use that term, there is that responsibility of keeping faith, letting them know that there are efforts at bringing about accountability for what they have experienced. I also think as activists, as all on the panel are, on behalf of justice, it's imperative in the standards, the norms, institutions of accountability in the face of such stark impunity that we continue to project into Syria that there are efforts at accountability afoot. I want to end my comment by just flagging a few things, tagging on to Beatrice's list, that could be done in the very short term. First, have UN member states committed to justice get the Syria Commission of Inquiry over here in the next few months to brief the General Assembly on its most recent findings. All that would take is a group of governments committed to that to go to the office of the President of the General Assembly and say, we want to see this happen. Second, Beatrice mentioned this, and I imagine Ambassador may as well, using the laws of states to prosecute crimes committed abroad, what's known in the trade as universal jurisdiction, and not allow accountability to be submerged into simply a counter-terror regime, though there are serious terrorists at work and they need to be dealt with. We can't lose the sight of accountability for crimes against humanity and war crimes. I think those are two steps that need to be taken right now to push this ball forward. Thank you.
And I would echo a lot of what my colleagues have said. Add a few things about ways in which I think we can move this forward and give Syrians the hope that there will be accountability, because it's discouraging to hear what Mohammed talks about, and I've run into it as well as I deal with those that are documenting these things. It's never going to happen. I mean, these atrocities have gone on now for fully 3.5 years since the students were demonstrating in Daraa in March of 2011 and faced oppression and torture by the government. And we don't have justice yet. Other situations, though, have taken longer. And what we've seen internationally in the course of the last 20 years, that there, even though one can't see when it's happening how a Milosevic will ever be brought to trial, but he is, or a Charles Taylor for the crimes for which he was responsible in West Africa, or the people who were committing the genocide, thinking they could get away with it. Sometimes it was possible to respond more quickly there. Other situations, it's taken longer. And frankly, I think every time we even put an 82-year-old on trial for killing 2 million people, we send a signal that there's no, if you're the you're author of these horrendous atrocities, there's no escaping it in this life. It will catch up with you. And continuing to deliver that message in places where we can is, I think, useful for Syria. Not enough, though. echo that this, in all our U.S. government statements, we've talked about this being a Syrian-led process. Mohammed is here from the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center, which was called for by Secretary Clinton in Istanbul in April of 2012, and then stood up with an independent board with active Syrian participation, with donors and contributors from dozens of states. And it's doing this great job of documenting and supporting other organizations that are similarly doing it. And this is extremely important as someone who's prosecuted these cases on and in Rwanda, because as Mohammed said, at the end of the day, we don't want to prosecute the foot soldier. We don't want to prosecute the child soldier who was dragooned into it and sent out there. We want to find a way to reconcile with the community. But the real authors of these crimes, the persons that stood to gain by their continued control and wealth, those are the individuals you want to target. But as a prosecutor, I'll tell you, just like prosecuting the mob, and the crazy Don walking around in Washington Square, you've got to prove that person is responsible for those horrible things that their henchmen are doing. And one of the things that's been very positive about the Syrian experience of the government is that hundreds of thousands of pages of documents have fallen into the hands of these documentation centers. And these people are like Nazis. They write everything down, just like with a defector who was involved in this process of taking pictures, 55,000 pictures of 11,000 people that had been murdered in custody, 400 with their eyes gouged out, people with chemical burns on their bodies, people eviscerated with their intestines outside their bodies. I mean, it's a horrendous thing taken by the government itself, etc., and documented with numbers on each individual. So that kind of information, the documents about those detention centers where it happened, can make these cases eventually in the future. Now, it is important, as I say, that this be a Syrian-led process. I do want to say that one additional point here is that we do have to keep in mind, because, at the end, there's always the desire to whoever wins it to hang the guys who lost it, that we do have to make sure that this is a balanced process, that the judges who are involved represent all of the communities, Alawi and Christian and Kurd and Sunni, Shia and others, and so that you've got that kind of balance, and that's an insistence, and that's one of the reasons why we sometimes insert international judges. They may not be hybrid courts but sometimes mixed courts, because when you bring in internationals from other countries who understand the traditions, etc., people feel, well, we're not going to have these local divisions, we're going to put that aside, we're all going to be judges, and that can help provide for the process, not permanently, but on a temporary basis. And in places like Bosnia, that's been highly successful. Of course, this whole question is how do we keep this alive? I mean, this discouragement that people have, and we can, and people say 200,000 dead, hospitals and doctors targeted. I mean, it's as if the first never existed. I mean, the rules that people have followed, even bad regimes in World War II followed rules against targeting doctors and hospitals, and now they're doing this kind of thing. How can we send the signal that this is going to happen? And it does involve this constant drumbeat of getting the information out there, of talking about these atrocities, of giving it publicity, of giving it the sort of attention that it deserves. But I think it's helped by whatever efforts you can to actually begin cases. And you can't do it in the ICC because there's Russian vetoes. You can't establish a hybrid court because all the hybrid courts we've had have been courts in agreement with the government. You're not going to reach an agreement with Assad to try Assad. That's not going to happen. But other states potentially could have the right to prosecute these cases. For instance, if we see people that are among those that are tortured, that are American citizens, we can prosecute in our courts the people that are running the prison or the individual torturers. Now, that doesn't mean we get them into court tomorrow. They're sitting in Damascus, etc. But they sure as heck know that there's an international red notice from Interpol against them. They ain't going shopping in Athens or anything. They're going to get extradited. And so these kind of steps could be useful using the jurisdiction that's available, and for for prosecutors at the national level and authorities to look for different ways that they can pool their resource information. It's still limited because most of these these 200,000, I mean, 98% are exclusively Syrian. And we can't prosecute in our court for doing that. There may be some ways to do it in some other countries. If you've got someone that's one of your citizen that goes in there, like a foreign fighter, then potentially you can prosecute them. And extremely important thing to do, but those may not be the people that are the mass atrocities. And there may be simpler ways to prosecute them for aiding a terrorist organization, but that's something else that we look at. But we continue to look at these avenues to bring accountability forward today in the places where we can do it and lay the foundation that we will do it in a broad and proper Syrian-led way, but in a fair and balanced way that respects international human rights in the future. Jennifer talked about preservation. Just 10 years ago when we were in Sierra Leone, we got our evidence the hard way. We had investigators go out evidence, and we built our cases based on the evidence that was garnered through direct and circumstantial evidence. Just 10 years with the advent of social media and the ease by which anybody can, quote, produce evidence, it is a tsunami of information. We're talking terabytes of data to various accountability organizations using standards that particular organization is using. But I'm here to tell you 90%, 95% of that data, that information is worthless in court. Chain of custody issues, authenticity issues, and so it's going to be a real challenge to answer your question about preservation of evidence. Yeah, we're preserving a lot of data. It's not evidence, and the real challenge of a prosecutor, whoever that may be, is all of a sudden these documentation centers are going to show up and hopefully not dump on the prosecutor, but his challenge with this. And they may end up just not using it at all and building their own cases based on what they can find. So we have to be very careful of this, quote, preservation of evidence. It's not evidence. It's lots of data. And we have to be very, very careful. It's going to be a huge challenge, more than I think any other tribunal has ever faced in its existence. Even Justice Jackson, the Nazis wrote everything down, and his case was a paper case. And he had like 12 train loads worth of data, paper. We don't have paper, but we have lots of data, terabytes worth. So it's going to be a real challenge.
David, let me ask you to talk a little about the Caesar report. I know we have so much that has to be covered and so much that has to be done in the short term, but I think it's a riveting story how you ended up getting the torture photos out. And I know you've taken them to the Security Council and shown them there. And I've seen some of them, and they're absolutely horrific. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to have those and give us a little background?
Well, it's an amazing story. It's one of these stories that Hollywood would jump all over. We have a sergeant in the Syrian army who is a forensic photographer. We have forensic photographers in any army. Their job is to take pictures of deceased human beings, which he did over a period of over a decade. At the beginning of the Civil War, and where he worked in this military hospital, he noticed that more and more bodies were coming into the area, and his job was to photograph them, number them, fill out a report, sign it off, and forward that data appropriately under their administrative system. Well, as it got to become more problematic, he knew a friend who knew the resistance, and paraphrasing here now to make it brief, he reached out and said, look, I'm taking photographs of over 50 to 60 dead human beings a day now, 7 days a week. I can make copies of it, and I can bring them out. And so over a period of 2 years, from September of 2011 till August of 2013, he made copies of these these horrific, mind-boggling photographs. He smuggled these photographs. Again, we're not talking paper now. For those of us a little older, always with their 8x10 glossy color photos, they're basically smuggling them out in a memory stick in his shoe. They would do random searches, and so he really put himself in harm's way. He was successful, but in August of 20, it just started getting to him. He actually, I've met Caesar. He made a startling revelation that I didn't even know about, and Steve, I don't think you even know about. Both of us were testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee at the end of July, as Caesar was sitting next to me. He had mentioned that one of the reasons, because one of the congressmen asked him, why did you do this? He goes, because I started seeing friends and relatives and neighbors coming across the table. And he just couldn't take it anymore, so he signaled, I got to get out of here. Well, this is where it gets a little Hollywood, but it is an amazing cover story. How do you get this guy out without doing all kinds of troubles with his family and neighbors? They kill everybody if they find out he's a traitor, and Muhammad can echo this. So they killed him. They, quote, killed him. He allegedly tried to defect, and as he was crossing enemy lines, he was killed. He really wasn't. And the family, they told his family that he had been killed. They even held a funeral. In reality, he was being smuggled out of Syria into Jordan and then worked his way into Qatar, where the team that I was on had a chance to begin our assessment of what he was doing. So out was, and again, Steve can actually, my other colleagues who've been doing this as well, it's rare that we have direct evidence. A lot of it is circumstantial, a lot of it is eyewitness, but we never get pictures, we never get documents. And we were struck by his credibility and, of course, the credibility of the photographs. We had forensic pathologists, we had experts in photography, we had a forensic anthropologist go through these photographs and found them to be scientifically credible. But the point, as prosecutors, you don't get the 8x10 glossy color photographs. This is direct evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And we took that data. One of the things, speaking of preserving, working with Steve's office and others, we were able to take those photographs and put them in a neutral European country's evidence system so we could preserve the chain of custody. So someday when a prosecutor comes to get those photographs and data, then we have an authentication ability that these are truly the photographs, so that if we bring Caesar on the stand and say to authenticate and bring these into evidence, he can say, yes, I took those photographs. Well, how do you know it? Because that's my signature. I wrote that number, etc. And those pictures come into evidence, which are now preserved and will be in this evidence locker for until it's asked for appropriately under law, and then it can be brought in. This is the challenge that I was talking about. All of this data coming out of all the good work that Mohammed and his people are doing, and other authentication and documentation centers, is it just coming at us. There's no authentication, it's just data. And none of it can be authenticated, or most of it can't, so we can't turn it around into evidence and then use it to prove a case. It's just a lot of information but that's the Caesar issue. But it is, at the end of the day, as we said in our report, it's direct evidence that the Assad regime has an industrialized killing going on, and it's clear and direct evidence that it's war crimes and crimes against humanity.
If I could add just a quick word on this point before moving on. The amount of material, and I'm glad you've characterized it not as evidence, but information and data, is I think unprecedented in terms of any atrocity crime situation that I can remember. And I guess a question under the rubric of what can be done now is what can be done now more effectively for those inside Syria to publicize the, if you will, industrial of information that will, in one way or another, be used to facilitate prosecutions. That let's turn a challenge into a positive in terms of the aspirations and hopes of folks in Syria. Last point is I'm interested in hearing is 10 things we have to do to get a referral to the ICC, and I will take very careful notes. I do want to say that I think we need all the toolkit, you know, the ICC, some kind of mixed mechanism, national courts together, along with the truth-telling, vetting, reparations, etc. So I just don't want to get into a debate over this versus that when we're going to need the people of Syria are going to need every tool to work as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Richard, for that. Absolutely. I think you might analogize to a number of our situation countries. Like in the former Yugoslavia, we have the Yugoslav Tribunal, we have a hybrid, and we have domestic courts. For Rwanda, we have the International Criminal Tribunal. For Rwanda, we have prosecutions in domestic courts, and we have Gacaca. We see the need for multiple tiers of justice in these horrific crime scenes. So I also wanted to turn to Beatrice and talk about France's work to get the referral resolution. We see an outpouring of support. I think it was 64 General Assembly states support this, over 100 NGOs support this, and then it gets vetoed. Can you describe the process, but also I'm curious on these 10 steps, what can be done now? Is this off the table, or can we get this back on the table somehow?
Thank you, Jennifer. It's certainly not off the table. I will pause sometimes and recall some things that have been done in May, but let's look forward and let's look what I can describe you the negotiation, but let's look forward. First of all, we do have a lot of good things that we retain from May. You mentioned some of them. I think the demonstration that an ICC referral garnered widespread support from all the regions of the world. There were a lot of doubts and skepticism that the court was not liked in Africa, that there was a malaise also with the Arab world, and you see among the co-sponsors of this resolution by France a number of African countries. You see for the first time a resolution on the ICC sponsored by Arab states such as Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Qatar. So this we have to keep in mind, the widespread support, those who voted in favor, and which co-sponsored, and that remains an important issue. Another one, when we decided to go forward with an ICC resolution, we really built our work upon an initiative by a member state in Switzerland. Really, Switzerland spearheaded the whole effort by this new kind of campaigning. You prepare a letter to the Security Council, you have it signed by a number of countries, and when you have garnered sufficient support, then you find a state in the Security Council willing to do that. And I was discussing with my colleague from Switzerland yesterday, and she told me that Switzerland was trying to find ways to revive the initiative, and for us that's really very, very good news. Other points that we think we have to keep in mind. This veto by Russia and China. Okay, there was a veto. What can we do? We think that China and Russia have noted that, again, during the last few weeks, you had a huge coalition of states in the UN, which has emerged. The a coalition to oppose the use of veto in the face of mass atrocities. We had a ministerial meeting where more than 25 states came to speak in favor of a voluntary restraint by permanent members of the Security Council. So there are new things that we can talk about with Russia and China. You have a new situation on the ground also. You have ISIS on the ground. You have a large consensus on the need to stop ISIS crimes. And I haven't counted the seven. I haven't counted. What else do we have? I mentioned the new special representative. There's a discussion to have. We are lucky enough to also have the Commission of Inquiry work. Richard, you mentioned it. We are considering what can be done in the General Assembly to make sure that not only the Commission of Inquiry can report in the General Assembly, but also maybe that the General Assembly can go a little bit further than what the Council of Human Rights did by just transmitting the text to relevant bodies and maybe send it to the Security Council, and why not with a strong recommendation for an ICC referral of other kind of accountability mechanism, by which I mean building up national tribunals. Sorry, Richard. So that's another idea that we have. The COI, speaking of the Commission of Inquiry, there is one thing we believe maybe we could encourage the COI to do, and I have better criminal lawyers around me than myself. But we have not been very convinced by the arguments by the International Commission of Inquiry that it was not possible for them to publish names in the report. We don't believe that we believe that publishing names in all those forms of pressure that we've been speaking about would be useful. We don't see it as impeding in the medium term prosecution at all. So that's also something we're trying to work on with the Commission of Inquiry. So those are efforts that we're doing now, and again in the Security Council this month. I draw your attention again. You will have one of the debates during the month of October in the Security Council, which will be about methods of work of the Security Council, and definitely from the Argentinian presidency of the Security Council, a big focus on accountability and what you can do to work better with the ICC. Maybe not 10 points. But.
So I want to go back to a couple of the points. I think one of the major failure was when we sent an International Commission of Inquiry, and the Commission of Inquiry got their access to Syria denied, and nobody acted on that. That set the stage for impunity. We're not going to letting you in. Go to Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan, meet the refugees, and do whatever you can do. That sent a bad message to Syrians and to the Syrian regime as well. And with all the political statement coming from the NATO, from President Obama, from lots of leaders, well, there's no international intervention, nothing we can do here. The Security Council is blocked by the Russians. We send a bad message about feel free to kill more people. It's a green light to kill more people. And here's the problem. Even in the US position and the ICC, unfortunately not what we wanted. For 2 years, the US opposed the referral to Syria to the ICC. To the moment where the chemical attack happened and the British great excellent draft to the Security Council was passed about referring only the chemical attack to the ICC, the US was not supportive of that. So here, there's a couple of measures in the eyes of the Syrian regime from one side, and Ambassador Rab, feel free to correct me, please, on this. That's my comment, at least. The bad messaging, or the perceived in a bad way by Syrians, hey, nobody will do anything. And to the Syrian regime, hey, nobody will do anything to follow you. And here's the problem. And I want to go back to one more. You mentioned Patricia, about working with the legal councils, with the Free Lawyers Association and Free Judges Association. These are great example of missed opportunities that we could have used in much more powerful way, and we missed them because in the moment when we had in court the liberated areas waiting for help and support, we did not help them, the internationals I'm talking here, and we did not help them in anything meaningful. Now we're trying to implement projects to support the stability in the liberated areas 2 years late after ISIS came and took over the liberated areas, and there's nothing doable and possible. And I want to hint a little bit on the U.S. support to the U.S. Congress passed a resolution approving $500 million of lethal and military support to the in-quote moderate opposition groups. And here where the U.S. has a good and excellent opportunity to do the vetting not only in counterterrorism, but also in human rights violation. Any group committed some of the violation you just mentioned, Professor, from the COI Commission for Inquiry report should not be supported by US dollars, taxpayers' money. This should be principled position from the US. You shouldn't really have committed any violations in these liberated areas. And B, which is very important to me and report soon on this, is the Sharia courts working inside the liberated areas. Those courts are headed by people who's not judges, not law educated. They don't have high school diploma sometimes. They just appointed by the militia leaders to be judges. So I appoint you to be judge, and theoretically I give you a mandate to oversee what I do. But I pay your salary and I put the in your door, and I know and you know you don't dare to do anything to me. Those people hijack the jurisdiction, and we cannot work in the liberated areas. All the great judges I met in Gaziantep and before in Syria, they cannot go back to Syria. They were arrested and sent back to Turkey with a threat: if you cross and step back here, we're going to shoot you on the head this time. So this is a problem here, and there's a great opportunity by the US to use it here, saying if you embolden those Sharia courts, military assistance, we should set up the stage back for the real judges, the real courts, the legal system, and of course, here not only the military assistance, the political willing to support here. It's not only by saying support accountability or we fund and support documentation efforts, but also to work against those countries who support the Sharia mainly, who's the main supporter financially to the Sharia courts and the militias who's running the Sharia courts. And the US can practice really strong political pressure in countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia to stop the emboldening the Sharia courts. I'll stop here. Sorry.
I certainly share your view about those courts and the unjust verdicts and people beheaded after a few minutes of testimony and sometimes not on the basis of even criminal evidence. So, but I do want to say something about our law in regard to this, which frankly complicates our efforts, but does fulfill some of what you're talking about. More than 15 years ago, Senator Leahy sponsored bill in Congress to essentially prohibit the United States from training or assisting units or individuals that have been involved in human rights violations. So in all of our training programs, we send somebody to an institute. We come to town in order to have a seminar for each of those people have to be vetted in terms of their human rights background. And of course, this can create problems in a conflict zone where it's hard to determine what somebody did at one time or another. But clearly the program that we're talking about in terms of the moderate opposition will have to go through that kind of step, which is one of the reasons why people complain that it won't be immediately effective. A while to go through that process, but that's necessary to accomplish what. To follow up and sort of on the question of other things that can be done, and of course, in the absence of Security Council. And if we don't have the Security Council for ICC, in other words, 9 votes and no veto out of 15, and if any of the 5 voting no, and we got 9 affirmative votes, we can't go to the ICC. We also can't even pass a sanctions regime, or the kind of resolution we had on Charles Taylor, or that we have in the CAR in Central African Republic, or in other situations where you have a panel of experts that goes out and identifies who the arms traders are, and who the human rights violators are, and puts those people on international sanctions to have their assets frozen or their travel restricted. So we can't go there, but countries can. And both ourselves and the EU have a sanctions program, and we're sanctioning people in the Syrian conflict that have been engaged in human rights violations. But one thing that's happened in Europe recently is, of course, well, the evidence wasn't strong enough to sanction this person or this institution, and then those sanctions are knocked down legally. I think we need to be able at least to use the kind of evidence that we're developing now to be able to support that kind of sanctions regime. And frankly, said, well, they can't go to Europe, their accounts are frozen in Europe or the US. It may be more symbolic than real, but there is nothing wrong I mean, with sanctioning people, even with naming their names publicly, as long as you're not sending somebody to prison, as long as there's a strong basis for doing it. The commissions of inquiry that have been established by the Human Rights Council, like we have in Syria, and I understand the Human Rights Council is a council in Geneva with 47 countries on it that are elected by the General Assembly. The United States and France are now members of it. By a simple majority, it can establish a commission of inquiry. That's why we've got it. Russia can't, China can't stop it in Geneva. On the other hand, they write reports, and they can't get in the door if the country says no, and they have to do the best job. Every few months they issue their reports, and we learn longer than any. And they've actually, they were telling us the other day, have interviewed 3,218 people so far, et cetera. So they're doing fantastic work, but they don't name their suspects because they're a little concerned that would violate their rights, and they instead create a list of suspects and give it to the High Committee, puts it in a safe, and saves it. There's an ICC case or some other court that will that may be appropriate in our rules, but I do think we've got to find a way to use that information to individuals, at least for sanctions.
Well, I'm getting signs we're supposed to open to audience questions, but with a little indulgence, I'm barely in my list of questions. I want to ask a couple more, and then we will get to audience questions, so please of them. So David, you've worked on this Chautauqua blueprint. Can you tell us a little bit about it, just to the audience? So when we throw out this term, it's a mixture of international and national aspects. Tell us a little bit of what you envisioned. And, when I envisioned this panel, I thought we were talking crimes within Syria. Now they're clearly over the border in Iraq. Would you modify your hybrid that's not just focused on Syria? Are there creative ways of having this come to pass? Because it's already been referred to, most of our hybrids have involved the government consenting. Well, Assad's not going to consent. Maybe someday a future government will, but we don't know. Are there other mechanisms? We have seen the Special Tribunal for Lebanon created by the Security Council, but I think we can anticipate a Chinese-Russian veto there as well. Could you have a regional organization, the Arab League, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation? Can we have out-of-the-box thoughts on how do we do a hybrid? I think we're going to have a new hybrid. The EU's doing a hybrid involving Kosovo. So we're getting a little out of the box. So a lot of questions about hybrids for you.
Chautauqua Blueprint was created back in 2013, where a group of 12 eminent scholars and practitioners, individuals who really helped create what we call modern international criminal, got together and said, this has never been done before, and that is when we have an atrocity, reacts to it and then decides to create a court and then drafts a statute and then it's passed and then the court is created. Many things that are going on that are very innovative, and one of which is why don't we put together a statute and put it out there that contemplates allowing a domestic court, a group of nations, the international court, to use as a structure by which they could pass legislation or have a resolution created that would cause a court to happen, such as a hybrid. The Chautauqua Declaration is quite detailed. It's literally a statute that not only lays out what a court would look like, the makeup of the court, jurisdiction of the court, etc., but also the types of crimes that it would actually prosecute, etc. What we use are the authority to actually arrest, indict, and prosecute individuals. So the theory was that we would have this available to the international community as well as the Syrian domestic system to be able to use this as a model to pass legislation to create whatever they decide it would be. So it's a little bit of misnomer. Yes, it's contemplated that it could be a hybrid court, a mixed court of both Syrian and international, but also it was designed also to allow the Syrians themselves to take the declaration and model their own bill to create the court itself as well. So again, I think it's exciting. It's never been done before. I think it's gotten traction. It's out there, and I think it'll benefit the thinking and in four corners what it takes based on just 20 years worth of experience. This wasn't just a bunch of academics writing this down. These were the people who helped create the ICTY and the ICTR and were at Rome and created the Special Court for Sierra Leone and then worked through these systems as well to create those. So that's the Chautauqua blueprint.
Thanks. I know probably the others want to respond, but I'm getting signs I have to move on. I want to give Mohammed the last question. So Syrian views on all this. So I've seen your poll results, which say Syrians want accountability, but they favor a Syrian court. I want to ask you, to what extent do they know what the ICC is, what a hybrid is, and is it possible we have formulated it, which one of these do you want? Whereas I think, I don't want to put words in the panelist's mouth, but I think none of us would say any one mechanism is going to do the full job. So maybe if there's an understanding that we're saying it's got to be approached, I don't think any of us would deny the importance of Syrian courts. So multiple levels are important. Do you think there would be support for ICC or hybrid in the context of multiple levels of justice?
Indeed, the problem is the lack of understanding of the full concept of each one of these tribunals. What the tribunal about, how many cases can take, what's the financial economic consequences that a tribunal cost might be in a post-conflict, a post-war Syria that with a limited fund for reconstruction for the country. That concept is not there in the eyes of Syrians, and that's why I kept referring about poor communication and poor reach out to Syrians. And I referred those points to the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs in the round table last week. We need to do more to talk to Syrians, to tell them, hey, here's the available alternatives, here's the consequences, here's the package comes with it, and here's the other all mechanisms that can come hand in hand to achieve better justice model. It's not only one court versus others. In our interviews, though, one striking point was there is resistance, or I don't want to say hate, but hate sentiments against anything international. That's coming from 2 points. One, hey, you let us die for 4 years, and now you're taking our tribunal. Go out, we're doing it our way. The second thing, there's a great, there's a big, not a great, a big sentiments toward revenge and killing. The International Tribunal will not allow that. Everybody knows international standards should and must be respected here. Otherwise, it's not a tribunal. So the victor justice is a problem. It might be there. And unfortunately, we have to say this, the reality will impose the way it will conclude is going to basically have a big part of the saying which model we're moving. And the third, the most important point is the death penalty. After Assad used chemical weapons against us, killed 250,000 people, 9 million refugees, and now we're going to send him to 14 years prison in the 5-star hotel in The Hague. We're not going to take that. So we're doing it our way, but the civilized way of killing through a court in Syria. And we have all the rights to look in suspicion about a domestic national mechanism that does not really take in consideration national guarantees for fair trials.
I just wanted to follow up on one point, and obviously this is a debate, and we have to work these things out with Syrians. On the other hand, getting international support and buy-in and making it will be part of this process, because obviously we don't want this to be a court that adds to conflict. We want it to be a court that reconciles. I did want to say something about international justice, and I know David and I heard it in Sierra Leone. People said, why are you spending money on this court? Couldn't you spend it on development, et cetera? And And by the end of the court, people weren't saying that anymore. They were saying, you sent the message that you can't gain power by violence, and we've had a couple of elections, and the opposition won and was allowed to win, and society still, with a lot of challenges, and all of us were, our countries were providing major development aid, but having a court helped establish peace. And I was in a forum not long ago with some academic experts, Catherine Sinkink and others, that have actually done studies. A lot of it comes out of Latin America and elsewhere, but where there actually have been prosecutions for serious human rights violations. When there's been international prosecutions, provided they're communicated to the national level and the people see what's happened, those societies afterwards have had less violence, less attacks on personal integrity. It's a demonstrable thing. Societies that skip that process continue to have these problems, continue to recur. So at the end of the day, as we have, if somebody can come in and take your daughter away and make her a child bride and make your son a child soldier, chop off your son's hand and kill your wife and burn down your house, what's development? You can't build, you can't do anything unless you've got the rule of law and clear message that there's consequences for these atrocities. So it's fundamental, and it's something that we have to invest in.
Very quickly, two thoughts. One, I worry, frankly, that the prospects for any kind of tribunal that you mentioned, Jennifer, um, is declining because some of the states involved or might be involved in a regional tribunal. And I'm thinking of states from the Gulf region who were very interested in pushing after the vetoed ICC referral, some other mechanism. Those governments are now involved in carrying out airstrikes against ISIS and others in Syria. My concern being, even on the regional level, an appetite for accountability that cuts across the board and looks at all actors in a conflict might be on the wane. I hope that's wrong, but I haven't heard much from the governments that were carrying the banner for a regional effort previously. And lastly, just to say, I think the emphasis on communication is absolutely key. One of the points I've learned from Mohammed is the imperative of pumping information to the Syrians as much as possible. So I think so many of these steps need to be social media or other means to the communities most affected by them.
Final word to Beatrice.
Very quickly, one small point on the views of the Syrians. We also have to deal with the interlocutors that we have, the political interlocutors that we have. And so, just to mention, I didn't say it before, that before we actually submitted a resolution for referral, we did wait for the coalition with moderate Syrian opposition to actually express support for the initiative. This was one way we found of trying to involve. And then, it's a panel, it's a debate. We're in the UK. We have this, you can take a disagreement. There is a disagreement when we speak about. I don't think we should. We all think all levels of justice will work together and it's going to be okay. Issue for the 120 states parties to the International Criminal Court, that they have created a system of international criminal justice which is supposed to be an innovative system mixing different kind of traditions, etc. It's going to be very difficult for them to have nowadays a special, something that looked like a special court with a new code. For us, it kind of introduced too many standards now of justice, and there is a very good point made by Richard that depending on which states support this, there can be doubt about the credibility and legitimacy. This is why, for us, it's not really a matter of wording when we say that it's a little bit easier for us to support Syrian National Court in one way or another. You spoke about what the EU does, but it's very interesting. The EU called it a delocalized Kosovo court or Kosovo tribunal delocalized, but not an. I know it sounds words, and in the face of all those atrocities, it sounds very technical, but it has a meaning for the community of states belonging to the International Criminal Court. So
Now, I really feel open to audience questions. I think we can't possibly tackle big question, which is really, what is the future of international justice? Is it just the ICC, or will we have other tribunals? And I would like to do another panel on that another night. Any audience questions? Yes, in the back. We have roving mics that will come towards you.
Hi, my name is Srinjoy. Can you hear me? I'm from Human Rights Watch. I have a question for Professor. Professor? Yeah, Professor Crane. Sorry, I forgot your name. So, I believe you, in your blueprint, you were trying to draft an outline for a domestic hybrid court, but I've not read it, and I don't know what the. But one of the reservations which I have is, what's the? Wouldn't it be easier to refer the situation to the ICC rather than create a court from the ground up, new finance and economy to create a new court and new logistics rather than use an established court?
And maybe we'll take a couple questions. Would we have maybe two more? I'll take maybe 3 questions up here in the front.
Which had that information was the U.S. To Richard's surprise, when he asked for the information from the U.S., they said, no, you're not getting it. So here's the problem. If you're a special prosecutor or you're looking for evidence, what happens when you're up against a powerful state, which for political reasons has the evidence, but won't hand it over?
Okay, maybe one more question, and then we'll turn to these. No? No courageous soul. Okay, we'll start with these two. David, I guess?
I still didn't get the question. I couldn't hear. Oh. Well, it's the $25 question, and 120 nations are kind of asking that question repeatedly, and it's an important and fair question. We've worked very hard to create a permanent international court to deal with atrocities. However, there are some limitations to the ICC, and one of which is it was always designed to be a court of last resort, all right, and the most egregious crimes. And with the principle of complementarity, the emphasis on the state's parties who were willing and able to prosecute to do so, and willing or unable, or another state party chose not to prosecute, then the ICC could step in. So we tend to think that the ICC is this overall umbrella that can take any case, anytime, and prosecute and seek justice for people who are oppressed. That really isn't true, and it never to be that. Facing in the 21st century, where nothing is black and white, lots of grays, we still have to deal with the gray issues, and at times we may have to do other things in order to seek justice for people who are victims of atrocity. And you're seeing this debate right now. We're trying to deal with situations that are changing on a weekly basis as far as circumstances and atrocity within the region itself. But it's a good question and a fair question. But we're not trying to diminish the importance of the ICC. We're trying to seek justice. Sometimes that justice may or may not be the International Criminal Court.
And I would concur in what David said. I think it's important to note that in none of the situations in which the ICC has been involved is it more than 4 people to trial. It only handles a few, and then there, of course, certainly in a Syrian context, there are at least dozens of authors of mass atrocity on different sides. And so where are those people going to be tried? Maybe at the national level, but maybe you can't do it there. And this is one of the reasons even the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia charged 161 people, which is 10 times what the ICC has brought to trial. But it's still, the international community supported a court in Bosnia, a very society with international judges sitting in the Bosnian court for a period of 6 years and finally being withdrawn. And they prosecuted cases from the Srebrenica genocide, convicted people of genocide for 5% of the cost of the cases in The Hague, and did it close to the scene of the crime with judges from each of the various parts of, ethnic and religious groups of Bosnia. So the idea that you could have a court that's handling that mid to upper level in these situations is very real. On the question of state cooperation, the Security Council created tribunals like the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal had the authority to demand that all states cooperate with the court and make binding orders. The United States has provided abundant information to the ICTY. Other states have as well. There's specific rules, the information to be provided for leads-only purpose, and for there are certain disclosure regimes to be followed. But it is important to have state cooperation, and of course some states operate them in the prosecutor, and the Yugoslavia Tribunal jousted for years with authorities trying to get maps from attacks that occurred during an operation in 1995. Sometimes it's not there, sometimes you don't get it, but you do need to have cooperation. Of course, David and I at the Sierra Leone Special Court, we didn't have mandatory cooperation, but we still managed to get a lot of states to cooperate, and Charles Taylor was arrested and brought from Nigeria, a state that wasn't required to surrender him, but because of international pressure, it happened. And so it's quite often not just the legal situation, it's the voice of civil society, it's the voice of human rights groups around the world, and of friendly governments that can help make this justice work, and that's what we've learned in the last 15 years.
I would only underscore that the closest parallel that we have, I think, is, and the lesson to take from that is you need action, and Beatrice is right, it won't all be love and warmth, but you need action at different levels, the international, the national, and the local. Given the scale of crimes in Syria, anything less than that would be selling victims there short.
Again, on this issue, let's be careful with words. What we were talking about, Richard, is the problems raised by what we call regional courts or courts only by a few states. And in the face of what the Syrians have suffered, we also don't want to give the impression that it's just justice supported by a few of us. So that's why we're being very very careful about what kind of scheme but where we all agree is that we start now. We start thinking about it now, and what we can do, we do it now. Just a word on preservation of evidence. This is something, and again, that's why we favor the widest possible support for the court that will deal with. And why I'm always very attached to the system of the International Criminal Court. When I was working with Prosecutor Moreno Ocampo in the International Criminal Court, we realized that we realized that we could not rely just on the information that what you call powerful state were going to give to us, because there would be string attached, not string in terms of condition, but there is a need for confidentiality. They get information from very confidential sources. So one very was to also rely and get evidence from a number of African states, a number of Arab states, parties, not parties. You just, try and get information for all those who can help you, and then you have, you do have in the end maybe a balanced set of evidence. But relying only on a few permanent members of the Security Council to give you information, yeah, that might get you stuck in your investigation. Yeah, but you do also get a lot of information from the regional countries. The regional countries can give you also a lot. Again, we get to those directly interested.
Do we have a couple more questions? Michael in the back.
Thanks. Hello?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Michael Cooper from the Plowshare Group. Just going back to a statement that David Crane made very early on in the presentation, and he asked the question, is the justice that the international community is prepared to deliver the justice that Syrians desire? And thinking about that comment, about sort of the theories of criminal justice, of why do we punish people? We punish them to rehabilitate them or to incapacitate them and keep them from doing further harm. Also, there's the theory of retribution. And when I listen to what Mohammed has to say, it seems to me that there's a great desire in Syria right now for retribution. That seems to be the driving model of justice, if you will. So when I think about all that, and I think about the question that's put before this panel tonight, which is essentially, as I understand it, what can we or should we do right now? It seems to me that establishing the rules and the mechanisms for justice, that it's imperative to do that right now in this conflict. It's imperative to do it before we know who the winner is, because right now we don't know who will win at the end of the day. And if we want to avoid the sort of aversion that we have to victor's justice and all the negative aspects that come along with that, it seems like practice right now before the conflict is settled. So I wonder if you have any comments. Thanks.
Well, again, thank you for reinforcing the point. Is the justice we seek the justice they want? Things are happening. It's not a perfect happening, but there's lots of good initiatives. I lead an effort called the Syrian Accountability Project, which is taking a lot of this documentation, mapping, building a crime-based matrix, drafting sample indictments, etc., building a package for a local, regional, or international prosecutor to take that and begin an investigation. So we're doing that now, and it's never been done before. The question I had when we began working with the Syrian resistance back in March of 2011 is, what would a prosecutor need, a local, regional, or international, to start a case? And so we began to do it at the beginning of the conflict versus ending it and then going in and trying to find it, which is what we've done in the past. So this is just an example of an international panoply of effort that is going into building a case against all parties. The important thing that must also be underscored is in the Syrian Accountability Project, for example, we're looking at everybody. It's not all about Assad, but we're looking at, and it's an amazing process to watch as you review the crime-based matrix, how at the very beginning, very simple conflict is perfectly simple, but looking at what's happened now, it was Assad and the Free Syrian Army. And it looked like a typical Arab Spring resistance situation. And then it got longer, and it got bloodier, and we noticed that 80% of the war crimes and crimes against humanity that were being perpetrated were by the Assad regime, with some problems with the Free Syrian Army. As it became bloodier and longer, it got more personal. People became involved and were products of this atrocity. And we saw a shifting, that the resistance was committing the same amount of atrocities as Assad. And then we injected jihadis and Islamists who weren't really doing for anything. They didn't follow any law, and all of a sudden we've just got a bloodbath going on. But what we're doing is we're documenting, we're mapping, and we're developing indictments against the leadership of all of these warring factions, so that someday when a decision is made politically as to what this justice mechanism is going to look like, local, regional, or international, there will be a package which will be handed to that prosecutor, which then can begin the process of winnowing it down to come up with valid, authentic legal document or evidence and indictments under whatever law they're prosecuting. Syrian law, some type of international or hybrid international statutory, or the Rome Statute. In fact, the crime-based matrix is broken down not just by incident, who, when, what, and where, but also we actually highlight the specific paragraph and line number of the violation of the Rome Statute, the Geneva Conventions, and we've translated the Syrian criminal code, and we now are citing all of the violations of the Syrian criminal code, which is a valid code, even though Assad bastardized it by doing his own thing and by governing by decrees. The actual Syrian criminal code that's been around 50 years
since 1949
is really impressive. And if some governmental activity allows that document to remain in force, the Syrians can prosecute validly with appropriate judges, can actually criminal code that is in existence.
Yeah, if I may add a couple of points here. Thank you for the question, because indeed it's one of the important things. We have lots of stakeholders, as David just described it perfectly. We started against the government. We ended up with tens of governments intervening, with jihadis, with militant groups, and there's lots of competing priorities will be rising at the end of the conflict, and how we look at it. And that's why I keep mentioning the communication to reach out to Syrians, because nobody managing the expectation about what to happen among Syrians. Everybody expecting full compensation about their damaging. Everybody expecting 100% full justice. Anybody violated anything will be behind bars. Everybody and these expectations are, of course, not realistic, and there's limited resources and ability to do. That's not being communicated to Syrians. And if they wanted to accept the international norms and the international standards, through communication to them right now and showing them the bad way, if you do it, the bad way, what the consequences would be. If you want to do a tribunal with death penalty, quick victor justice, nobody was supporting fund for that. The UN will withdraw, the EU will withdraw. Them the models available with all the pros and cons for everyone, you'll get lots of people on board, especially now after 3.5 years. Lots of people are tired and they just want to quit this with the best basically possible outcome in justice, compensation, and peace building, and regaining some stability. Today, yesterday, Syria time, for the first time, pro-Assad people, there is a protest because the government failed to protect them in Homs after two bombed cars in front of a school for children. 39 children unfortunately died, and the people started protesting against Assad. The government did not open fire on them. What the Syrian comments on this? We protested for the exact same reason, but they responded to us with the snipers. Why this is not happening? So lots of Syrians, not there because they're bad and they want revenge, because they feel that's unfair. That's not fair to do it this way. But talking to them, showing them examples from literally Bosnia as one of the most closest examples to Syria, telling them, hey, this is the only best possible outcome you can get out with it. Otherwise, this will continue in another round of endless cycle of violence. I think lots of people will be on board with the idea with some fair and accepted trials. Unfortunately, I have to say this, the Syrian opposition is not here. Their absence in the discussion of accountability and discussion of justice, they're not there, they don't know what they want to do. There's no communication with Syrians. It's just one of the missed that although in Geneva negotiation and the session happened in February, the opposition did a good job using the human rights abuses that Assad committed, but it was used for the political debate, not only for the case of the justice itself. Honoring the justice itself might be difficult for parties of the conflict because the opposition, as everybody mentioned, have involved as well, get involved with lots of violation itself. And the militias themselves might be the biggest challenge, not only people, average people, to accept the tribunals. Thanks.
Well, oh, okay.
Just a small point, because I agree so much with Michael that it's important at least to lay out some of the principles of what this should it be, and it should be that it needs to include people of all of the various communities. The rights of each have that the justice process in criminal is only for the most serious perpetrators, that it's individual criminal responsibility, not group responsibility, that there are some principles. And I know Mohammed's talked a lot about peace, and of course figuring out how we go from here to peace, and with the justice aspect of it is always challenging. How do you get someone to sign an agreement that could end up in their prosecution? We also know that you can't push justice off the table. And if we are in a peace process, these principles have to be reflected there in such a way that people can sign it and think, well, because of the fact that it's going to be balanced, and I'll have my people there and others will be there, maybe it won't unfairly charge me. But people have to have that assurance, I think, to go forward. And as difficult as it is, that has to be part of it, not defined down to exactly how it's going to be. The essential principles, and that's part of not bargaining it away, one of your initial points, and part of it of justice for the people of Syria and preventing it from happening elsewhere or again in Syria.
Fortunately, I think we have to end. And thank you so much to the audience, to our panelists. It's been a terrific discussion, and we'll have to continue it.